The Appalachian Mountains are some of the oldest in the world, and we just happen to live in them. One thing we can tell you, there are ghosts in the mountains.
Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Ghosts in the Mountains. I am your host, Caleb Hanks, and my co-host, Austin Burgess, will be with us shortly. But we are dead in the middle of spooky season, and we thought there would be no better way to really lean into the spooky spirit than to do a Faces of Evil Volume 2. So, let's all get cozy, maybe try to get whatever atmosphere you're around just a little spookier than usual, and let's tell some scary stories. So, Austin and I have been doing this podcast for almost a year now, and I've talked a decent amount about my early days in paranormal investigation and my early interest in ghostly phenomenon. But I've never actually told you all the story of the very first thing I ever experienced that I thought was paranormal. And I'm not gonna lie, this experience at the time frightened me so badly that I actually felt physically sick to my stomach for an entire day after this happened. So, without further ado, this is a story that I like to call The Night I Met Ted Bundy's Ghost. Now you're probably thinking, okay, what is Caleb on about? But hang in there. This is going to make sense here in a minute. So I was probably around the age of 13 or 14. So around 1999 or 2000. I was staying at my buddy Scott's house with him, my friend Braun, and his cousin Andrew. The story kind of starts out like some sort of teen horror movie. We were all out skateboarding in a cul-de-sac. I specifically remember we were listening to Alien Ant Farm's Michael Jackson cover of Smooth Criminal and a cover of Take On Me by MXPX. Just a bunch of young, rowdy, punk rocker kids wasting time and talking about a lot of stuff we didn't know anything about. It was a typical day, just hanging out, doing nothing. But the story really begins that night. So we're all hanging out in Scott's room, and at one point, he starts telling me a very interesting story. Scott was adopted, and I'm not exactly sure on what side of what family this relation came about, but as I remember it, he was telling me how one of his parents on either his adopted family's side or his biological parents' side, who he had traced back and figured out who they were, ended up being related to the judge that sentenced Ted Bundy to death, Judge Edward Coart. So upon discovering this relation that the family had to this judge in this very, very famous case, Scott and his family took a pretty big interest into the history of the case. As he was telling me this, he went and got this big manila folder, and out of it, he began to pull out these old 70s magazine pages that had been ripped out of a magazine from around that time when Ted Bundy had been sentenced. And then he pulled out a very specific image, one that you probably have seen. It's the image where Ted Bundy is visibly emotional in the courtroom and has his mouth open and his hand raised, as though he's about to slam it on the table in front of him. This was a full-page version of this image. And Scott told me that he was fairly certain that this image was taken when Ted Bundy was sentenced to death. All in all, I found the connection to be very strange and very interesting. At the time, I knew that Ted Bundy was a serial killer, but other than that, I really didn't know too much about him. But I knew all around the dude was bad news, and thought it was pretty cool that Scott had this connection to this trial. We left all of the magazine pages and that image just out on the dresser in Scott's room there, and went on with the rest of our night. We stayed up late talking about bands and girls that we had crushes on and all that sort of stuff. The typical ponderings of a group of 13-year-old boys. We talked for hours about all kinds of different stuff, and the hour grew later and later. Now, as you all know, I grew up listening to stories from my parents about ghosts and goblins and Sasquatch and the like. So, as the night got darker and stranger, so did the topics of our conversation. We start talking about ghosts and the paranormal and weird things. We were pondering about portals to alternate dimensions to the spirit realm, and sharing some stories of hauntings that we had been told by our parents. And this next bit, I will remember for the rest of my life. I remember that the sun had just very, very barely started to come up. So we had stayed up until the early hours of the morning. And then right in the middle of one of our conversations about some weird stuff, we all heard this sound. I looked over, and there was a page of the magazine slowly falling through the air, and as it tilted down while it was falling, I saw that it was that image of Ted Bundy. And so did Braun and Scott. I remember distinctly, Braun grabs the covers of the bed and just covers all three of our heads and just starts going, holy shit, holy shit, holy shit, did you guys see that? Did you see that? All three of us said, yes, we saw it. And Scott and I started saying, we gotta get out of here, we gotta get out of here. The three of us bolt out of the room. Braun's cousin Andrew was still asleep on the floor, completely unaware that any of this was going on. The three of us run out of the house and run out into the driveway. And I remember standing there with my hands on my knees, breathing heavy, thinking, what in the hell did we just witness? Braun and Scott were standing around frantically trying to rationalize what they had just seen. As we were talking, we ran over all of these different questions, like, okay, so maybe the ceiling fan just picked it up somehow and it came flying off of the dresser there and floated down to the ground. Sure, not impossible, but one thing that's weird about that is that ceiling fan had been on all night. Those pages of the magazine had been sitting on the dresser for maybe around 6 or 7 hours. How could it have just caught some sort of current in the room and lifted up then? At the time where the page came off of the dresser, all three of us had been sitting still talking for a very long time. No one was up moving anything around. And the other thing that's kind of weird is I'm fairly certain both Braun and Scott reported that when the page came off of the dresser, they almost saw it get a little bit of a lift rather than it just slide off the dresser. We continued to stand outside, trying to calm down, trying to rationalize this, but we started thinking that if there was some sort of paranormal entity in that room, that Andrew was still in there. We needed to go help him. So we quickly go through the house and each grab some form of weapon and roll in there like a really low-rent version of the Hardy Boys, ready to whoop some ghost's ass. But when we returned, Andrew was still lying on the floor asleep. He had no idea that anything had ever happened. I think maybe Braun eventually woke him up, and we told him about this crazy thing we had experienced. I remember him kind of having this reaction of like, oh, really? Damn, that's pretty weird. But that was about it for him. After a while, everybody pretty much calmed down, and Braun and Scott eventually ended up being able to go to sleep. But not me. I was in the bathroom floor feeling completely nauseated because that event had freaked me out so badly. So at the end of the day, did the ceiling fan just pick up some weird air current pocket in the room and send that picture floating off of the dresser? Potentially so. And I'm willing to accept that explanation. But there is still a part in the back of my mind that always thinks that maybe that was the night that I had a brush with the ghost of Ted Bundy. However, if I'm playing against the odds, I think I will take my chances with some sort of spectral version of a serial killer rather than a real one. And there have been many people out there who have unsuspectedly had a brush with something truly evil, much like the people in this next story. Now, there's a chance that you may have heard this one before, but I hadn't heard it until very recently. But given the context of the last story, I thought it would be a fun one to throw in. So, as the story goes, a man and a woman that met in college are on their very first date together. And by all accounts, it was a pretty average date, and maybe a little below average, because after a while, both parties involved kind of start to feel like this really isn't going anywhere. So as the date starts to kind of naturally come to a close, the man decides to do something unexpected because he figures, nothing left to lose, huh? So he says to the woman, hey, would you want to do something kind of crazy and unexpected with me? The woman is a bit surprised at him saying this and replies, well, what do you got in mind? He goes on to tell his date that he goes walking on this trail sometimes in the Provo Canyon in Utah, and he goes a little bit later in the day because there's usually not a lot of people there at that time. He tells her that the trail opens up to this beautiful overlook where you can see the canyon and the stars, and it's really a sight to be seen. But baseline, they would be hiking in the woods in the middle of the night. Now, initially, she's pretty surprised that he would suggest something like that, but she's actually kind of intrigued and excited at the prospect of doing something kind of strange with somebody that's basically a stranger. So she says, you know what? Actually, yeah, let's do that. So the couple pay their tab and get in the car and drive out to Provo Canyon. The two of them set out on the trail, and a little ways into this nighttime hike, the whole essence of the date begins to change, and they're actually starting to feel a little bit of chemistry now that they're doing something kind of fun and exciting and risky and kind of scary. But the further that the two get into the woods, although they don't immediately communicate this to one another, both of them start to feel a pretty uneasy sense of dread. But neither of them say anything about that because they figure, oh, it's probably just the rush of the whole experience. But both of them kind of start to pick up the pace a little bit. They're essentially speed walking at this point, just trying to get out to the overlook and get back before potentially running into a dangerous animal or falling off a cliff. But then, very close by, they start to hear something moving around in the bushes. And at the very same time, the man steps on something that he described as feeling soft. Without any verbal communication, the couple instinctively turn around and hightail it back to the car. Eventually, they make it back to the safety of the vehicle, and through some nervous laughter, kind of start ruminating on their experience, talking about how they had heard something out there. Maybe it was a deer, who knows? But they both undoubtedly remember both feeling that strange sense of dread. One of a few miracles that came out of that whole entire situation was after the man and the woman went on this date and bonded over this strange, crazy, and frightening experience, the two actually end up really hitting it off, and eventually they got married. But a decade later is when the high strangeness would finally catch up with these two. Around 10 years after they met, they were enjoying a relaxing evening at their home, and an evening news program is playing ambiently in the background, where a news reporter is interviewing a death row inmate, a character that had been making some waves in the mainstream media at the time. And as this inmate is being interviewed leading up to their execution date, the interviewer starts to ask about all the crimes that they had committed and the people that they had murdered. And eventually, the interviewer asks this person if there was ever a time that they almost got caught. To which the inmate replied, "Yes, actually. There was a time out in Provo Canyon where I had just killed a girl. And as I was trying to get rid of her body, a couple came walking around the corner, and one of them actually stepped on her body. I wasn't but about a foot away, watching them in the bushes, waiting to see what they would do. But for whatever reason, they turned around and left." And even more terrifyingly, he subsequently admitted that if they had looked into the situation further, he would have killed them too. And in case the inference was not clear enough, the inmate being interviewed was Ted Bundy. And as strange as my interaction with the potential ghost of Ted Bundy was, after hearing that story, I'm really glad that I ran into him after the execution. This next story, I wasn't even planning on telling you about in this episode. But as I was telling the last one about this run-in that I had had with Braun and Scott, it reminded me of another strange incident that I had not thought about in a really long time. But it happened at my buddy Braun's house that was in the last story. This one I can only call the ghost child in the storm. Braun and I grew up playing in a lot of bands together. He introduced me to a lot of punk rock bands like Blink-182, and there were many, many nights that we hung out at his childhood home. We would sit on the back porch there and listen to albums like The Starting Line's Say It Like You Mean It and Finch, What It Is to Burn. Those were some pretty formative albums for us. So one kind of weird detail about Braun's childhood home was that his driveway was in the middle of what some people called Dead Man's Curve. That was not the official name of it, but it had gotten a bit of a reputation because, as he understood it, and then later told me, at some point before they lived there, there was some nefarious person that was running from the police. And when they came around that curve, their car spun out of control, and they hit a tree, and they were instantly decapitated. It wasn't very hard to believe this story because, well, that curve was really treacherous. And if you were going too fast, I could easily see somebody being in a wreck there. And you might think that with that part of the story being told, that we saw some sort of headless apparition. That's not what happened. But we did experience something that we both thought was really strange one night, and it actually scared us pretty good. As a lot of spooky stories start, this one actually does take place on a dark and stormy night Braun and I were sitting out on the back porch talking about whatever it was we were talking about, and the rain was coming down pretty consistently. Now and then you would hear the sound of distant thunder. Now, this particular property, the backyard went down a bit, and then there was kind of a slightly wooded area with a creek running through it, and then adjacent to the house was another piece of property with a house on it. Not super far away, but far enough away that you really couldn't see a ton of details about this house. The back porch faced this residence, so when you were out there, you were kind of forced to be looking over in that direction. Now keep in mind, it's probably 11:30, maybe 12 o'clock at night. Not impossible, but there's not a lot of human activity going on anywhere around us. And I don't remember exactly what it was that we were talking about, but it wasn't anything spooky or paranormal in nature. But all of a sudden, at the very same time, we see what looks like a little glowing child run across the backside of the adjacent house and then disappear into the darkness. We both looked at each other, and then Braun said, "Did you just see that?" I said, "Yeah, what the hell did you see?" Braun said, "It looked like a little kid, but it was glowing." I said, "Yeah, that's what I saw." We both exclaimed a mouthful of expletives and hauled ass back into the house, where we were both visibly shaken and peered out the window towards that residence for a little bit, trying to see if maybe we could catch a glimpse of whatever we saw again and that way be able to identify it. But we never saw anything else. We stayed there with our knees on the couch, looking over the back of it through the window for a good long while, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever this was again. And one eerie detail, I specifically remember seeing this little white glowing entity swinging its arms up rather high adjacent with its chest, and its legs seemed to kick out rather straight and rather high. So in the event that this was some toddler out in a thunderstorm around midnight with seemingly not a lot of clothing on, when it's late summer and not exactly warm outside, then okay, it's definitely not impossible for that scenario to take place, although it is pretty strange to say the least. And if this was just some small kid that had gotten out of the house and was running around in the rain, well, it was still a pretty unsettling thing to see when you're out there in the darkness. As I remember it, there was a street light on the other side of that residence, so there was a bit of an illumination there. But this entity was running along the back side of the house, which actually shielded it from any of the direct illumination from the street light. Braun and I, being young, dumb kids, related this entity to the most relatable character we could think of at the time, and immediately dubbed it the Pillsbury Doughboy, because as strange and funny as that may sound, it did kind of look like that. The next morning, we asked Braun's mom if she knew the people that lived across the way and if she knew if they had any children. And from what I remember, she told us that it was actually an older couple that lived over there and they didn't have any kids, which only made me and Braun feel weirder about the situation. He and I talked about it multiple times in subsequent years, and still to this day, I have no idea what it was. But believe me when I tell you that when I saw what I saw that night, whatever it was, the damn thing really gave us the chills. In this next story, we are going back to the 1960s. When my mom was a teenager, her and some friends of hers had always heard stories about a weird, giant, abandoned mansion somewhere out in the middle of the woods here in western North Carolina. And the word around town, or at least between the teenagers, was that this mansion was frequently used as a hub for satanic rituals. My mother was not super keen on the idea of going and trying to seek things like this out, but in true typical beginning of a horror movie fashion, some friends of hers were into that very idea. And unfortunately for her, they knew exactly how to get to the abandoned mansion. So her and a couple of friends get in the car and they start driving. She said that they drove for quite some time until they found themselves driving up a very muddy road that was surrounded by the forest on either side. As they began driving up this muddy road, my mom says that she remembers seeing the silhouette of a big pointy turret of the mansion starting to poke out from behind the trees. That in itself is already a pretty ominous mental picture. But as they get closer and closer to this strange, dark, abandoned mansion, they see a figure dart very quickly behind the car, so close that they could see it lit up by the red taillights. They realize that it was just a deer that had run out behind them. Seriously, who's writing this shit? This is like Horror Story 101. Just kidding. This is exactly how she said it happened. She said they got about as far as you could see that the house was kind of in this grove in the woods. But the closer they got to the mansion, one of the people in the car became hysterical and insisted that they turn back. And they did. My mom has always kind of felt like she had a sixth sense about things, and she said that that place completely gave her the creeps. Well, it turns out that maybe her intuition actually was pretty good. Not too long before my mom and her friends went out there to try to find this mansion, Asheville and the neighboring town of Hendersonville, North Carolina, had experienced something truly horrific. On July 22nd, 1966, the bodies of Vernon Shipman, 43, Charles Glass, 36, of Hendersonville, and Louise Davis Shoemate, 62, of Asheville, were found dead, all laid out in a crude circle. They had been brutally beaten to death. However, despite police efforts, no killer was ever found to be associated directly with these murders. There is a lot that goes along with this story, and we will definitely do a completely dedicated episode to it. But for now, I will just leave you with the information that, despite there not being any sort of official record saying that authorities thought that there might be some sort of an association with these murders and the occult and or satanic practices, there certainly does seem to be speculation within the surrounding communities that maybe this was part of some sort of strange occult ritual. But then my mom found out something that was very strange. She had a friend at school who had a family member that was a federal agent, and by all accounts had been tasked specifically to look into occult and satanic activity in the area that potentially could be linked to these murders. She remembers talking to this person about what their relative had found, and she said he talked about these very, very large culvert pipes that you could get to from the parkway, but they were pretty hard to get to, mentioning that he found all kinds of strange evidence of occult practices and animal sacrifice in those culverts. But even stranger, he was tasked to look into a strange old abandoned mansion in the woods that had a long, muddy dirt road leading up to it, and seemingly also confirmed that this was the exact house that my mom had gone to. The federal agent said that he went up this muddy road towards this house on foot, and as he began to approach the house, he said there in the mud were hundreds of bare human footprints. But this man was very thorough and good at his job, and set that weirdness aside to continue on into the mansion. And although he didn't elaborate much more past this statement, he did say that when he went into the mansion, there was definite evidence of satanic rituals and animal sacrifice. Now, you can interpret what was going on there however you like, but I tell you what, if I were by myself out in the woods near a creepy old mansion and saw hundreds of human footprints out in the mud around it, and evidence of occult practices and animal sacrifice, whether this was related to any sort of human murder, in the wake of the subsequent murders of those 3 people, I would be very, very frightened. And in conclusion, I think that this is just another interesting example of how evil can have many faces. Well, happy spooky season, everybody, and welcome to the second half of another episode of Ghosts in the Mountains. You have just been gracious enough to listen to my ramblings for a whole 30 minutes of some of the strange encounters and weird ghost stories and things that I have experienced. And some of these I must have regressed because, Austin, number one, welcome to the show. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing great. And those were pretty spooky. I hadn't heard a majority of those, actually.
Yeah.
So that was all news to me.
I'm excited for you to experience those because some of those, like I said, I feel like I've kind of regressed some of this stuff. Not to mention it happened like so long ago, like the one with the ghost child in the storm. Yeah. Some of those stories I really had not thought about in a very long time. And you and I always laugh because I'm like, I haven't experienced a lot of paranormal stuff in my life. And then we start doing the podcast. Yeah, and I'm like, Jesus, I actually know I've had a lot of weird stuff happen. But everything that I told in those stories is exactly how I remember them. A lot of it is very just weird to think back on because it did happen so long ago. But it, to me, very much feels like it wasn't all that long ago. Even something like the ghost child in the storm story, although I hadn't thought about it in a really long time, as soon as I started to think about it, the more I was like, oh God, yeah.
That mental image just popped back in.
100%, dude. Like, I remember seeing whatever that was like it was last week.
Wild.
It was so bizarre, dude.
Yeah. And I hadn't heard that one before, so that was all news to me. Obviously, you didn't remember it until this week, so it wasn't something we discussed previously.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think it really was like somewhere regressed in my mind. But I haven't talked to Braun in quite some time. But if I said, "Hey, man, remember the time we saw the Pillsbury Doughboy?" Oh, he'd know exactly what I was talking about.
Imagine that's not something you easily forget.
Yeah. And if it was the Pillsbury Doughboy and that was some sort of, sentient Doughboy homunculus prize that you won from opening up the right can of biscuits, you guys were doing some weird shit with your marketing in the 90s.
That sounds like a weird Ghostbusters spinoff with the Stay Puft Man, Pillsbury Dough Man. I don't know.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they kind of had versions of that in some of the newer ones.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, man. Where do we begin with this
I guess let's just start with the Ted Bundy story because that is the one that I had heard from you previously.
Right.
And I think the first time you told me about it, I did a little digging, which I'd kind of forgotten about until this week. So I was kind of like, what did I have to add on to this? And luckily I found it all again. But I don't know how much you've dug into the concept of the ghost of Ted Bundy.
Not at all, really.
It's actually a pretty frequently encountered and reported spirit.
Really?
Yeah. A lot of it stems from the Florida State Prison where Bundy had his final days. There was actually a reporter that did a news interview down there and a news story in 2001. So like not super recently, but in the grand scheme of thing with Ted Bundy, I'd say that's, well after the fact.
Yeah.
And the reporter was interviewing several guards that claimed to have seen the ghost of Ted Bundy sitting casually on the electric chair moments after the death penalty was executed.
What the hell?
Yeah.
So he's like sitting on his own body?
Essentially, they claimed that Bundy's expression was almost like this knowing smile. And if the guards tried to approach him, he would just disappear.
What the hell, dude?
So this was in an interview from guards that worked during this in 2001. So I'd assume a lot of those are long retired by now. But the man telling the story said that there were so many sightings that at one point the warden could not find anyone who was willing to work the execution chamber alone.
Damn, dude.
Yeah. So whatever was going on there, it had the staff pretty spooked. There have actually been other similar reports from this prison. It's now known as Union Correctional Institute. It's in Rayford, Florida, a little bit north of Gainesville. I actually make a yearly trip down to Gainesville right around Halloween time for the fest. So that hit pretty close to home there. Very topical and relevant right now. But there's another report, this time coming from an inmate that was staying there, I guess you could say. This report came from May of 2013. And the inmate was quoted, "As if the past few weeks couldn't get any stranger, it would appear that the ghost of Ted Bundy is once again showing up at the Florida State Prison in Rayford, Florida. For many years, I've heard rumors of Ted Bundy's ghost appearing and didn't believe it. Now my mind has changed. I and other residents, including staff, have witnessed the ghost on many occasions. It is definitely Bundy. It comes in the early morning before the dawn in our housing unit and travels to different cells. He's always smirking. It's a white-blue mist, but is very detailed. Some of the other residents have even claimed to hear him talking." So I think that prison seems to be the prominent place that the ghost is experienced. I think there's a few other accounts, but these are ones that have directly been reported from news outlets who went and interviewed, whether it was an inmate or prison guards working at the time. So this is coming right from the horse's mouth, the people that were on site there experiencing some pretty weird shit that they attribute to Ted Bundy.
Dude, okay, so when we did our last episode about Robert the Doll, we went into, I went on some psychological pseudoscience rants about some of the pseudopsychology. Because I have no degrees in anything other than being an idiot. But I kind of started to posit a little bit about some of that stuff. And I'm going to do the same thing with this because it's weird that, obviously when Bundy was on trial and he was very boastful and boisterous about the things that he had done, he was proud of all this shit.
Yeah.
And it's like, he's obviously an egotist. So it's like, was this dude's ego so insane that he literally wills himself to come back to mess with people, to just rub it in people's face that he did messed up shit? And then also, so in the story, I talk a little bit about how we, at the time that this happened at Scott's house, we are talking about paranormal stuff. And it's still very strange to me that, this picture that had been on the dresser was just, for hours with the, the ceiling fan on, no currents in the room changing, just decides at this weird crossover time between night and morning that it's just going to fly off the damn dresser. That actually could also get into teenage poltergeist activity.
Okay. The
mentally not even knowing what we're capable of. But the one thing that did cross my mind was is this dude so up his own spectral ass that anytime somebody's talking about it, he shows up?
Well,
where you at, dude?
Right?
I'm not saying you should come here. Don't, but
it almost seems like a Bloody Mary type thing.
Or the Beetlejuice
thing.
The
Beetlejuice thing, really. Or the Biggie Smalls thing, right?
Bundy juice.
So his occurrences in Florida don't stop there. There's quite a few more coming from the Sunshine State. The Orange County Regional History Center, which is in Orlando, actually holds pretty deep ties to the Bundy story because it's actually located in the building of the old courthouse where Bundy was sentenced.
Okay,
It's now a history museum. But storytellers and historians have told tales that Bundy's ghost still will haunt the courthouse, and they claim that he's almost unwilling to move on, is how they describe that. So that plays in to exactly what you're saying. Like he's still getting his kicks out of shit like this.
That's so wild because, like, if I am going to continue peddling pseudoscience, if you were to look into the implication of what the afterlife potentially could be in the regard of, here's this guy on Earth who's a serial killer who obviously likes messing with people psychologically, aside from actually murdering people. And he, on the other side of whatever existence is still like that. And
that's some evil shit right there.
Able to come back. I mean, dude, like I said, the implication there is a bit unsettling.
It definitely is. And it is interesting because, I think there could be some psychological aspects coming in with these people have this association with either the courthouse or the prison or places where he was actively, basically part of ending his life there. So maybe it is something that they've just gotten in their head and they experienced something, and the first thing they attribute to is Ted Bundy.
Sure.
I don't know, but there's more stories that keep popping up. There's been reports that his spirit was seen at the sorority house in Florida State University where he committed the murders that earned him the death sentence. So a lot of this does seem pretty central to Florida from what I've shared, but that's not the only place that his ghost has been reportedly encountered. So Bundy's remains were actually cremated, I guess at his request, and scattered in the mountainous wilderness in Washington State, which seems kind of weird to honor someone, to let him give his
what the
last.
Hell? It's like, no, dude, you're going in the Kmart dumpster.
Right.
Piece of shit.
I guess this was in like his last will and testament, essentially. So it's just kind of like a cordial thing, I guess.
Weird.
Which seems weird to me. But there are a lot of, reports of his spirit kind of being seen across the Pacific Northwest, whether it's out in the wilderness or there was even a contractor that was renovating Bundy's childhood home, which was in Washington State. This was around 2011, and he reported some pretty unusual occurrences, the main one being a message in dust on the floor that just read, "Leave." And that was enough for him to get the hell out of there.
Yeah, I'd leave too.
Yeah. So it keeps going on. You're finding these different occurrences, and I guess it makes sense. Washington State, he had some roots there. Florida is obviously where his reign of terror kind of came to an end. But I did find this article that was published in Psychology Today in 2012 by Dr. Catherine Ramsland, and it claims his spirit apparently travels, similar to how he roamed across the United States in life and during his killing spree. The infamous serial killer appears to be quite mobile in the afterlife.
Well, dude.
Yeah, I know. When I read that was just like that. If there's nothing else that adds credence to your story, I think that does a little bit.
That is effing bat shit.
Yeah.
That is crazy to hear.
To come from, I understand that she's approaching this from a psychological standpoint, so she probably, might not be fully bought into that, but the fact that that's her direct quote in the article, it's published in Psychology Today, so it's, a decently respected journal coming from a PhD.
No doubt.
I thought that's a pretty interesting quote to tie on to the possibility of Ted Bundy's ghost potentially visiting our mountains here.
Well, incredible find, because that backs up, my stuff.
Yeah.
However, I will say I'm married to a therapist. I do think a decent amount about psychology, even though I am not like schooled in the whole idea. One thing I will say, kind of touching on something that you mentioned earlier, is that, the cult of celebrity is huge.
Yeah.
And especially, oddly enough, with serial killers. Like, especially when you think about the things that people like Richard Ramirez did.
Yeah.
Unspeakable things to multiple people on top of murdering them, children. I'll just, leave it there. And there were women throwing themselves at him. And so what I'm kind of trying to tie this in with is, I do think it's a little easier for somebody to attach Ted Bundy to what may or may not be a paranormal occurrence and be like, because it is the area where he was or has been cited, and be like, no, it's got to be him.
Yeah.
I totally get the psychology behind that. But I got to say, I was not aware of a lot of the things that you're bringing to the table about like subsequent people seeing a ghost of Ted Bundy.
Yeah.
Gotta say, there's a pretty big pile of reports, if
Right?
nothing else,
Yeah.
about it.
Exactly.
That definitely seem to point towards something going on.
And the inconsistencies on location, I don't think necessarily discredit them. I think it almost kind of adds to what Dr. Ramsland kind of theorized, that this ghost is on the move.
I'm biased, but I'd have to agree. I mean, Jesus.
Yeah, for sure. So I remember finding that shortly after you told me this story months and months ago, and I was like, oh, I've got to save this. And then remembered it in the spur of the week. This is the angle I was going with it. So I'm glad I was able to dig that back up.
Hey, you and me both, buddy. That's insane.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
I hope all these people are, I hope everybody and the lady on Psychology Today are wrong.
I mean,
I hope that I was experiencing some sort of telekinetic teenage poltergeist experience, because either way we can make an episode out of it.
Yeah.
But it's freaking bizarre, dude.
that there is something to, I thought it would be sort of difficult to find something on just a vague concept that goes to Ted Bundy, but there's a pretty big plethora of information out there.
God almighty.
Yeah.
I think the thing that's most terrifying about that whole situation, like I said, though, is if that is something that can happen in the afterlife, then hell, maybe holy wars are real.
Yeah, no joke.
All right, let's get past this bastard because I hate him.
All right. I guess let's move on to your Pillsbury Doe entity and Dead Man's. So one question I wanted to ask on this, do you attribute anything from that child or Pillsbury Doe entity to the Dead Man's Curve legend?
That's an interesting question, and it's hard for me to say because I think like baseline, not really.
Uh-huh.
But it does kind of allow me to open up the gates to another potential pseudoscientific idea of, how paranormal things potentially could occur. I don't know. It's weird. I mean, I don't think anybody really knows the rules of like how spiritual forms would potentially manifest.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, some people, I think there's a lot of speculation as to where it's like, if you died when you were a kid, then if you manifest as a ghost, you're a kid.
Yeah.
Rather than like, if you die as an adult, can you manifest as a kid? Can you manifest as your younger self? If you died as an old man, can you manifest as your younger self? I don't know. It's kind of weird. I think there's a lot of different variations. But if I were going to tie anything to it in relation to the story that I mentioned of this guy getting decapitated in the police chase, one thought is, okay, well, maybe this guy died and he was like, I'm free from having to run from the law. I'm going to run around like a little kid for the rest of my existence.
Yeah, I like that line of thinking.
I don't know.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, man, I don't know what that was. I don't know what I saw. I have thought about like, okay, well, could it have been like a white dog that was out in the rain running around, and just the way that it was moving somehow looked like a little kid. And I don't think that that's completely out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the moonlight could catch it, almost giving it that illuminescent type.
Well, there wasn't moonlight, but there was there was a street light.
Okay, well, fair enough.
Because it was cloudy and it was raining out. But I remember seeing its arms coming up like it was running, and I mentioned in the story that it's like its legs were like strangely straight.
Uh-huh.
And its arms were coming up really high. And I don't know. But the weird thing was, it didn't look like if you're just watching like a shorter kid like run out through a field or something like that. It was moving very fast. It was freaking creepy. You know the one thing that it does remind me of?
What's that?
Is it the movie Sinister? Have you seen the movie Sinister?
Is that with the
Tiptoe Through the Tulips?
Yes, I have.
You know when the guy goes into the room and that song's playing and he sees the kid?
Uh-huh.
And the movement's a little weird.
Uh-huh.
Kind of reminded me of that.
Interesting.
Which is very freaking terrifying.
Frightening. Yeah.
That's the scariest scene in that whole movie, in my opinion.
Yeah. You didn't see a Yunwi Junsti there, did you?
Did I?
I don't know.
I don't know.
I mean, you also hinted at the concept of tulpas last week. So that's if you're seeing an apparition, let's call it that, of something that resembles a Pillsbury Doughboy, I think tulpa would be the first, maybe not logical explanation, but the first kind of theory that my mind would jump to with something like that.
All right, let's go off the rails. All right, we're going.
I mean, I don't know if we need to more than
Nope, we're going.
I don't know what else there is to say other than somebody's sitting there trying to create a tulpa, and he just sees a can of biscuits in front of him. And he's like, yes. And focuses on that. I don't know.
I'm very glad to know that your mind was in the same place mine was. Yeah, imagine you're this papaw and you love Pillsbury biscuits. And you're like, I love these damn things so much. I wish that the Pillsbury Doughboy was alive and he was my friend. Next thing you know, the Pillsbury Doughboy's alive, but he's not your friend. Dude.
This sounds like some B side movie.
I swear to God, if A24 comes out with a trailer 6 months from now, I want a check. It's honestly kind of creepy though when you think about it. As silly as it is, it's like he creates this. I don't know. There's a lot of weird stuff with like humans and bread, and like the body of Christ is typically like bread, and it's like we nourish ourselves with food, and this thing is like coming to life through food. I don't know. There's something there, and it's creeping me out.
I follow you there, I think.
My analysis is degrading this entire spooky season.
So where did this story occur exactly? I know the Dead Man's Curve. Is this what kind of area?
I don't want to give away the exact location because I don't know if family still lives there. Of course. But I can tell you easily it's not far from the Inca Middle School in Candler, North Carolina, which is stone's throw from the Engadine Inn, stone's throw from... Oh man, actually, here's something that's very interesting that I didn't even think about.
Yeah.
This house is extremely close to the Haunting of Hickson House house.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, very, very close.
The other one I was thinking of, and it ties into the serial killer kind of theme we have going here, is the Stony Fork picnic area that we mentioned in the Hickson episode 2, where the body of Judith Smith was discovered. And while that is still technically an unsolved mystery, there's quite a few theories that link her killing to Gary Michael Hilton.
Oh my God, that son of a bitch. Dude.
Yeah. Not to tie in another serial killer story, but I do think that's fairly topical for where this area is.
That one hits both of us at home.
Yeah,
a lot of that shit happened here. And not to mention, your dad was working for the Forest Service when he was dumping bodies all over the place around there. Yeah, screw that guy.
Yeah, serial killers, we're not fans.
And here's another freaking thing. Do they put all the serial killers in Florida? Because his ass is in Tampa, I'm fairly certain.
Well, I mean, so yeah, that's just kind of interesting. And I'd almost be interested to dig more into the Dead Man's Curve legend to see, is it just this one occurrence that happened there? Or if it's that dangerous of a road, you kind of might think, or not that dangerous, but that sharp of a curve, you might think there's been other crashes that might have happened over time there.
Peripherally, I think there were quite a few.
Yeah.
That was like the big story that they told me back in the day. But dude, like I'll take you there sometime. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about.
We'll play the Jan and Dean song when we drive up.
Oh,
you know what I'm talking about? The Dead Man's Curve, like that surf rock song that Jan and Dean. I don't know if you've heard that.
I don't think I have, but what's weird about that is Braun's mom's name is Dean.
Oh, weird synchronicity.
Yeah, that's a weird synchronicity.
The first time I heard it, to tie it back to Blink-182, they did a cover of that on some like surf comp in the 90s, and that was the first time I heard that song.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
It's more like a spoken word type thing. I'll play it for you after this.
Did Blink not do a song that was like a Lover's Lane kind of old surf rock kind of thing for that compilation?
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think you might. We're probably thinking of the same song.
I'm sure we are.
The Dead Man's Curve. I'll play it for you after this.
That's creepy, dude.
Little bit. Little few brushes with synchronicities on the names there.
Yeah, not liking how synchronistic this is. But I am enjoying how well it is playing to the Halloween vibes, because we were looking for spooky shit and God bless we found it.
Yeah, no joke. And I mean, honestly, I think unless you have anything you want to tie onto that, I think I'm ready to jump into what was probably the one that freaked me out the most. Let's
roll, dude.
Yeah.
And I like that this is easily going to open up a whole other can of worms.
Yeah, for sure. So, when I was listening to this, I couldn't help but just draw parallels to all the stories and potential rumors we heard about Seeley's Castle in that episode. So in my head, maybe I'm thinking like, is this just a version of that telephone game where one version of the story gets told and maybe tweaked a little bit on the next version? It continues to get passed down. And maybe Seeley's Castle's just this big, creepy, and it is, looking facade on the side of a mountain. So people are like, we need to attribute some spooky stories to there. Maybe they were borrowing some from the story that you were telling, and that's where Seeley's kind of got the bad rap from. I don't know.
Well, the thing that I find very interesting and very, very compelling about this is, okay, so our episode about the occult in Asheville, we cover a lot of that stuff in regards to Sealy's Castle.
Yeah.
And that kind of being in the public perception, if nothing else, this hub for potential occult and or satanic activity.
Yeah. And I think going back to that episode, just the word occult gets thrown on and lumped in with satanic activity so much, because this, what you're describing to me, seems like just straight cult activity.
Well, so what's very odd to me is this is basically a boots on the ground report.
Yeah.
Coming from my mom,
Yeah.
who experienced this, but happens to know somebody who has a family member that is a federal agent who is no shit tasked with going to check out ritual sacrifice, traces of satanic ritual, occult activity in general within, I'm pretty sure, the year that the triple homicide out there in Hendersonville
1966. Yeah.
So this doesn't have anything to do with Sealy's Castle.
Yeah.
This is actual federal investigation of Satanism. And the thing that I like about this is, dude, this is not something that you're really going to hear unless somebody just happened to experience it. Mr. Bundy.
I probably didn't have that hooked on very well, is what I'm going to tell myself.
But if you are here, Mr. Bundy, the power of Christ compels you. Get the out of my house.
For listeners, we have a little bit of a soundproofing here, and the panel right behind me just fell off the wall. There's no fan here today, so take that for what you will.
We don't have a ceiling fan in here. Get out of my house, Mr. Bundy, you piece of shit. You're not gonna hear this unless you just know somebody that happens to know somebody that's a friggin' federal agent.
Yeah.
So this to me is kind of reopening a can of worms when it comes to this idea of Satanists and occult activity in town. I mean, I feel like this is a thread you could pull. And I told this story exactly how my mom told it. I did omit some details because I didn't want to use people's names.
That's understandable in a situation like this.
But when I was talking to my mother about this, she was like, don't look too much into this. She said, don't mess with these people.
Yeah.
Don't mess with it.
Interesting.
And I said, I'm not going to. I said, but I'm going to tell this story because it's weird and it's interesting.
Yeah.
Subsequently, I do think I know exactly where that house was.
Ooh, I would love for you to pinpoint that on a map for me.
Yeah, I'm gonna.
Not that I want to visit. I'm just curious where it is.
I'm gonna tell you where it is. I don't want to say it on the podcast because I don't want there being a bunch of people going over there.
All the carpetbagger videos you saw at Sealy's Castle, right?
That's, in a weird way, I do kind of appreciate people going up there, but in another way, I'm like, dude,
leave the guy alone.
Leave him alone. And also, it's like, I think if you really wanted to get up there, you could probably figure out a way to do it that is respectful of the people that live there.
Yeah.
And then also in a way that you're honoring like architecture, history of the town.
Yeah.
And just being like, hey, I would really love to interview you. I would love to see the house if you'd be willing. And if they don't, get back in touch, well, then whatever. It is what it is. But I do think that there are avenues that one could take to be able to, at least reach out to try to see that.
Right. So with that warning, I probably will tread lightly and not go too into the satanic side of that. Maybe it could be its own episode. I fully believe that the triple homicide of Hendersonville is its 100% own episode.
Yep.
But I will go down a little bit of a rabbit hole here, because we've kind of tied in to a previous episode a little bit. And if you remember back to the Battery Park Hotel episode, the violinist Mark Wallner, who was one of the initial suspects in the murder of Helen Clevenger, he had an alibi that got him off, although a lot of people reported seeing him around town that night contradicting his alibi. So
I don't know. I think
he was one of the most sus, what do you want to call it, suspects or in potential murders. And
we're almost certain that he was the guy that they saw jumping over the wall, and then he hurt his foot because the next day
he when he was brought in for questioning, he had a messed up foot, had some bandages around there. Other people had reported seeing him right around the Battery Park area that night, out and about in the town. Meanwhile, his landlord's daughter seemingly kind of covered for him and told the police that he was in with her and her mom all night, and that's what got him off the hook. But as I mentioned, a lot of people were pretty sus even at the time. And I think even today, when you hear that story, you're kind of scratching your head on why that guy was able to walk away. When for a case that didn't involve a heavy amount of evidence, a lot of it was pointing towards Mr. Wallner there.
Yeah. And it's so weird because with it being in that close proximity to Hendersonville, where this guy relocates.
Right after the murder, Mark moves to Hendersonville, and he lived there until he died in 1969. So,
oh my God, he died. Oh, so how old was he though?
He was 65 years old. I traced that back today. So I did mention in the episode, there was one source that I found that claimed 5 unsolved murders occurred in Hendersonville during his time there. Well, I dug a little more into that, and from everything that I could find, I think 2 of those unsolved murders actually occurred in 1984 and 1986. So I think it's safe to say Mark wasn't involved in those.
No doubt. But there's still 3 unaccounted murders.
Yeah, the other 3 that referred to were there is that 1966 triple homicide that occurred there right outside the Lake Summit area in Hendersonville. And as you mentioned, like the bodies were found lying in this weird circle formation. They said that some objects were placed on some of the bodies. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah.
Which kind of adds a little bit of the satanic feel to it, I would say.
That's why I said in the story, although there was nothing that I saw in any official reports that tried to tie satanic activity to that, I think details like that got out and tons of people were speculating about it.
Yeah. And I mean, the cause of death was pretty severe head trauma from basically been bludgeoned in.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Well, dude, thing about it is, timeline does work out.
Yeah, I mean,
and look, 65 is getting on up there, but I mean, come on, man.
Yeah.
Like somebody that's 65 years old can easily commit a murder.
Definitely so. Like we mentioned, the case remains unsolved to this day. There were several suspects named, but none of them have been charged, and all of these initial suspects have since died. Makes you wonder if Mr. Wallner wasn't one of those names that maybe just popped up through past associations. The sheriff's department had to be pretty close to the Buncombe County Sheriff's Department. And like, hey, this dude was pretty suspicious during the Helen Clevenger stuff about 30 years ago. And he's been living there. So let's maybe look into him. I don't know.
Should we place bets on if we find his name and when we finally do that episode?
That would be very interesting.
I'll make it easy. We'll bet $20.
Yeah, sure. You bet.
I'm going to bet that his name does not come up.
Okay. I probably agree with you, but for the sake of the bet, I'll just, I'll put my 20 on finding something.
Well, if you don't, either way.
Yeah.
We'll be fine.
Yeah. And I don't want to get too much into the details because, like I said, I feel like this case 100% deserves its own episode. But, tying it back to old Mark Wallner here, like we said, it took place 30 years after the Helen Clevenger murder, which would have put him at 65. And like you said, I'm not saying that makes him incapable. He did pass away just 3 years later. So I don't know what his health condition was at the time. He could have been in deteriorating health already.
Sure.
Or, he might have had some alibi for that night as well. Who knows? But I think it's definitely a topic I'm interested in diving more into to see if old Wallner pops up again.
My thought was, well, I've got cancer. Let's give this one last big go.
Yeah, and the other thing that kind of tipped me in that direction too was the woman that was murdered there, Miss Shoemate, 62 years old, not that far off from his age. So it could have been some sort of acquaintance, or it could have been a failed love interest.
Was she not the one from Asheville?
She was. Another thread there.
So, okay, hold on. Sorry. So he's got this maybe older connection from somebody in Asheville that was around that time. That's weird.
Who knows? If Mark Wallner's family is listening to this podcast, please don't sue us.
Yeah, sorry. Look, we're just speculating. We're not implicating. We're just speculating. Sorry. There were no suspects in this case.
Yeah. Well, there were, and they're all dead now.
There was no confirmed.
Suspect
is what I was saying. Yeah. Damn, dude.
Yeah. So I'm definitely pretty interested to dive into, I know we don't like to cover a lot of true crime, real murder stuff, but like the Helen Clevenger one, this one was a pretty significant event that shook the community of Western North Carolina. So I think it is one that we kind of are obligated to dive into a little bit.
Oh, I mean, dude, the Helen Clevenger murder was absolutely horrific. But I would dare say that this triple homicide where there is implication that there is satanic ritual involved, Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty significant case. There's a lot of stuff that we'll go into. There's a lot of weird stuff in that I already know about in regard to that case. And I also have been told in good faith that there have been some ghost activity associated with that very thing. So I'm very excited to look into that case when we finally do.
Yeah, for sure. That'll be a great one. Well,
dude,
quite honestly, I don't know if I have too much else to say. I think that...
Dude, I think you did great even in that short window.
I mean, I love that everything kind of seemed to fall into place pretty well with what you found, and
including our sound barrier.
Yeah, right. A little uneasy about that one, but
you're only directly sitting a foot from it. It's fine.
Yeah.
Dude, again, volume 2. Faces of Evil. Here we are in our first year. We got a second volume of something. That's kind of cool.
Stay tuned for volume 3.
Yeah, I'm going to have to figure out what other repressed memories I have for that one.
We'll find that out in time. They'll reveal themselves over the course of the podcast.
Could they not? But I mean, okay. But dude, man, incredible work as always, Dr. Captain Count Bergula.
Thank you, sir. Great job with the tellings too. I love
thanks.
that these are stories that you can't just go on Google and find. They're so personal, and it's going to be the first time that probably everyone hears these, maybe with the exception of the actual Ted Bundy couple story, because that's crazy in itself. I didn't even touch on that.
Dude, what a story.
Yeah.
I mean, can you even believe that shit?
No, but I could picture the mental image in my head. Like, I don't know, for some reason, my mind just like, Drew, have you ever been to Fawn Lake up like north of Brevard? It's like Cedar Mountain area, kind of going into DuPont. It's not necessarily spooky, but when you go there at night, it's a good like probably quarter to half of a mile walk.
Yeah.
That you have to go down a dirt road. So you absolutely can't see anything. And in my mind, I'm just thinking of all the times I've walked down that dirt road and it's like had a little dinky flashlight seeing me through, and then
damn, I want to do that.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun.
Yeah, I didn't even know that existed.
Yeah, that was kind of the cool local swimming spot when you were in Brevard for the summer.
I've been thinking about this ever since you and I reconnected, and you might not want to, but I really want to. I want to do a Fear and Loathing in Brevard one night.
That's fine.
And I want you to take me around to all the cool watering holes as far as like cool bars. But later on in the evening, when we both think it's a good idea, I would like for us to maybe go to some of the spooky spots so I can finally see some of the places. Like what's the name of the places where you got the famous orb?
The Williamson Creek Bridge.
Yeah, Williamson Creek Bridge, that sort of stuff. I would love to see some of that stuff.
Yeah. There's quite a bit. My dad actually sent me one of those articles that has all the spooky stories tied back to Brevard, and Devil's Courthouse is just right up the road from that too. So that'd be a cool little pit stop as well.
Let's do it, man. All right. Well, unless you got anything else, dude.
I think I'm good.
Let's put this canister of Pillsbury biscuits back in the container.
Please do.
Well, as always, everybody, thank you so very, very, very much for listening. We have been having an absolute blast with our first spooky season with Ghosts in the Mountains. Man, everything that we have covered so far, minus the vampires of Dillsboro, have actually furthered my, I wouldn't say belief, but furthered the evidence for me into looking into some of these paranormal occurrences and being like, holy shit, dude, I think there might be more to this than I actually have previously allowed myself to think.
Right. And even with the Dillsboro vampire story, like even if that was kind of thrown off the rails at the end there, I still really liked exploring the concept of how something that essentially was originated on the internet in creepypasta, quote unquote, form has made its way into local legend and almost folklore at this point.
No doubt, man. And, when you think about vampires and ghosts and all the things that come along with this time of year, it's easy to think about exactly what we're talking about on this episode, the many faces of evil. However, when you have the dark, you've always got a little light. And that is every single person that pours into our emails and messages on Instagram and all of the good you guys do.
Even if you just listen and you don't reach out, we appreciate you just as much.
Very, very much so. There's nothing wrong with silently looming in the background and just enjoying what we do. And as always, we want to thank every single one of you for listening to the podcast. Thank you for just being part of this thing that we're doing. Also, we finally got Amanda from Blazing Pines Pyrography. We finally got the actual Ghosts in the Mountains piece of art that she made, and we're gonna talk a little bit about that probably at the beginning of the next episode. But thank you all again so many times. Also, we've had, ever since our Helene episode, we've had some people continue to buy the Helene shirts, and we're going to be able to take that subsequent funding and give that straight to the people that are, still rebuilding after Hurricane Helene. Thank you all so much for your outpour of support in, after that episode. Those were some incredible stories that we got to hear from everybody. And I think that we haven't been able to raise a ton of money, but anything helps. And I'm so glad that we were able to help out in that effort.
For sure.
But again, as always, thank you for riding this crazy ride. And I don't think that I am lying to you all when I tell you that the next episode of Ghosts in the Mountains is probably the scariest shit we have ever looked into. I am both excited and slightly terrified.
Yeah, I think it's terrifying, not only in a paranormal sense, but just a humanity sense in general.
Agreed. But we got blessed with our first spooky season. We got 5 weeks.
Oh, yeah.
So you guys are getting 5 spooky season episodes. And the last one, oh man, this one is a doozy. We have got some spectacular stuff coming up for you guys. So buckle up, get ready to get spooky, and we will catch you guys on the next episode of Ghosts in the Mountains. Stay spooky, everybody. Hey, Austin!
I knew that damn doughboy was going to show up. It wasn't Ted Bundy ripping my panel off. It was the doughboy.
It's me, Austin. Did you eat your biscuits this morning?
Ironically, I did.
Now he's pissed. You ate his people. He's coming for you tonight, Austin.
This is going to be a movie.
Dude, let's do it. It's got to be better than that Robert movie.
You watch it?
Nope, but you told me all about it. All right, providing Austin doesn't get eaten by the Pillsbury Doughboy tonight. Good night, and I guess we'll see you next week.
Yeah, I think I'll be here.
All right, see you guys. Eat your biscuits.